Hi, everybody. This is Nathan Lee, partner in charge of Richie May Technology Solutions. And I'm joined virtually today by JT Gaietto, the Executive Director of our cybersecurity practice here at Richie May Technology Solutions. And today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the threats that we're seeing during this COVID-19 pandemic, some of the things that have emerged that companies should be aware of as they deal with this remote working environment and the new reality that we're all in as a result of this pandemic. So glad to have JT here with me today. So thanks, JT, for joining.
Well, thanks for having me today, Nathan. If anything, from the comfort of my home office.
Yeah, it's nice, right?
Yeah.
Well, first, JT, I just wanted to ask you what some of the threats are that you're seeing right now during this pandemic.
Yeah, interesting question. And so one of the things that I think a lot of folks fail to realize is that the bad guys tend to monopolize on the opportunity when either there's a sense of urgency that they can impose on folks, as well as when there's potential for chaos. And in both instances for the pandemic, we've seen that be applicable. And so we're seeing attacks on video conferencing platforms like Zoom, and there's been a number of outstanding items that have come out of that. We've seen a massive uptick in websites being registered in relation to the pandemic, either related to Zoom meetings themselves or to the COVID-19 virus. And those are all designed to help support phishing and scam emails that they're sending into both organizations and private citizens.
So are scammers targeting any specific devices or organizations or maybe any specific programs or software that people are using? I know you mentioned Zoom, but any others you're seeing?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that over the last 6 or 7 months, we've seen the scammers really start monopolizing on multiple channels, and not just email, but they're using text or SMS messaging as well. And what's been interesting is that there was a scam that started about a week or so ago where folks were getting text messages saying someone you've been in contact with has come down with been diagnosed with COVID-19, click here. And then it would take you to a landing page that was then asking you for personal information, and it wasn't legitimate at all. The other scam that we've been seeing there as well is emails purporting to be coming from your organization. So as companies have decentralized their employees and people are working remote, for those companies that haven't defined a appropriate communication channel, that announcements will come from this person in HR or this person on your management team. The bad guys are taking advantage of that as well and sending out disinformation to try to get folks to take action that's not in their best interest. And then on the Zoom front, I mean, there's been a myriad of issues that have come out of that, and a lot of that not only is due to Zoom's software platform themselves and some of the security vulnerabilities that were discovered in the uptick in use of the tool, but also folks trying to leverage access to those meeting rooms and the just decentralized nature of business now, because as folks work from home, and folks don't necessarily have that same interaction face-to-face with customers or face-to-face with other employees, and so there's the potential there for some fraud.
Yeah. Have you noticed some trends along some of these lines as you've talked to clients over the last several weeks?
Yeah, actually, there's been a couple of trends. The first one is that state regulators are actually starting to take notice to both on the positive side and the negative side. So on the positive side, because functionally, in some states, for instance, they wouldn't allow digital signatures for mortgage loans, nor would they allow digital notaries. But because of everybody being pushed out into their home, the states are making exceptions to accept those processes as legitimate, as well as making exceptions on the loan officer's place of business being part of the MLS license. So because they're working from home and they're originating those loans remotely, they're making the exception that's saying, hey, that remote site doesn't necessarily have to also have a state license. Now that's obviously a temporary exception, but the good news out of that trend is that we're moving farther down the direction of having a truly digital mortgage, and eliminating a lot of the paperwork, or at least the physical paperwork that goes into that.
Yeah.
The negative side is that it's been interesting. There's almost been a twofold dichotomy in the industry. There's been companies that have developed pretty good remote workforce and business continuity strategies, and companies that haven't invested a lot in that. And the folks that have invested in that, they've definitely had an easier time transitioning into this remote work environment. The folks that haven't, they had a mad dash to get out the door. And the trend around that was they weren't keeping track of assets as they were walking out the door. They didn't have a good procedure for making sure that the computers that were being used in a home environment were going to be set up in an optimal nature. One such example of that is that we were working with a mortgage banking client that had sent out some employees to work remotely, and those employees had relatively older cable modem infrastructure in their house for internet. And in today's environments, the cable providers or the DSL providers give you a device that also has a router and a firewall built into it, whereas traditionally some of the older machines literally was just a raw internet connection that you're plugging into a computer. So those individuals were taking those corporate computers that were originally configured to be behind a firewall in the company office to their home, and then plugging it straight into the internet. And they had some minor cybersecurity issues due to that. And so I think what's coming out of this from a trends perspective is not only are we moving more towards a business enablement environment in a digital mortgage environment, but we're also starting to see the impacts of not having the right preparation to send people to work from home. And I think as we transition back into some form of normal business flow, I think those companies are also going to have to make sure they're paying attention to the assets as they come back into the building, making sure that they're clean, secure, and they're actually getting roughly the same number of assets back in the office that they walked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because the first wave of this for pretty much every organization throughout the country at just about the same time was getting the workforce remote, getting them set up to work productively at home, and that was sort of all consuming there for that first week or so. Now that we're past that, have you seen any trends or any attacks that have been common within the mortgage industry, or vulnerabilities that mortgage leaders should be paying attention to that you've seen over the last several weeks now that they've gotten through that initial requirement to just move the workforce remote?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely been an increase in wire fraud attempts, right? Because we're still originating and manufacturing loans. And again, the bad guys know that, everybody's distributed and everybody's not really communicating in a clean fashion. And so there's definitely been an uptick in wire fraud scams. The other piece too for remote workforces is some organizations are leveraging virtual desktops and remote desktops and things of that nature. And if a lot of companies have turned that on without working through the security implications of that as well. And so that's something else that I know folks should be paying attention to. And out of the financial services ISAC, there's been a lot of daily trends around increase in specific phishing attempts, not just for wire fraud, but ransomware, that has definitely been an ever-present issue in the mortgage industry, but even more so now when you start thinking about the fact that we've got our agents working from home. If someone does catch a ransomware and their machine's compromised, and that goes upstream to our remote infrastructure, or even just locks out a handful of our employees, the process to remediate that is going to be much harder now than it would have been 4 or 6 weeks ago when we were all sitting in a physical location.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any recommendations that you'd have as far as tools or resources that mortgage IT teams could use right now?
Yeah, first and foremost, because there's so much happening and changing, we created a website, a blog that's tracking all the different what they call indicators of compromise. So that's everything from known bad IP addresses that are associated with various COVID-19 scams, or email addresses that are associated with phishing campaigns targeting companies due to the COVID crisis. And so we try to keep that updated on a daily basis as new IOCs, as they're called, come to light. So that list is fairly dynamic, and one that we're highly encouraging mortgage organizations to leverage, because they can take that information and put it in their existing firewalls or email filtering infrastructure and help cut out some of the noise. Some of the other things that folks should have been doing already, but can start doing if they're not, is making sure they've got multi-factor authentication on all their remote access systems, as well as thinking about how they manage their email from a quarantine perspective. Some organizations have email filtering capabilities, but they're not automatically quarantining some of the more risky emails. So turning some of that stuff on, those are tools that you already own, and it's just leveraging it in a different way. And lastly, I would make sure that organizations are really thinking about how they're keeping their computers up to date now that they're out in the field. So that's everything from patching to antivirus updates to EDR updates, or whatever it might be, because we've become so accustomed to those computers being inside the office. And now that they've been gone for an extended period of time, we've gone through at least one patching cycle, since everybody's been working remote. So, and since we don't really have an idea when we're all going to get back to some semblance of normal, making sure that you're patching your systems and that you have a process to do that would be key.
So just JT, as we wrap up, I think it's pretty common, maybe it's always the case, that IT departments are stretched pretty thin. Certainly seems to be the case in the mortgage industry. There's always more to be done by internal IT leaders and teams than can be done in any one day or week or month. And so as they think about all the things that they can and maybe should be doing related to cybersecurity during the pandemic and even after the pandemic, what things would you suggest that they focus on, prioritize now, some things that they could do to maybe get some quick wins and really have an impact here with minimum amount of time spent?
No, great question. And one of the things that I talk about quite frequently is education. Your employees are both your greatest liability and your greatest asset as it relates to cybersecurity. And so making sure that you're educating them on some of the risks that they're facing now that they're in this distributed environment is key. And telling them, this is how we're going to communicate with you. We have having central points of contact, having frequent contact, I think really moves the needle, because it doesn't open up the door for a fraudster or someone else to come in and say, oh, well, hey, here's a new announcement from leadership. It gives a repeatable pattern that folks can come to expect. The other piece, though, that I really emphasize to folks is think about the tools that you own today and make sure that you're leveraging them in a best practices manner. It doesn't cost you anything more. It does cost some time, but especially if you're using tools like Office 365 or G Suite, there are security filters and other controls that you can turn on in those environments that can help you reduce some of the security background noise that you might be facing. And because that's still a central point for all that information that's funneling into your organization, that's helpful. And then the last one I would talk about for companies that still haven't done this yet is that I would investigate using geofencing. And so geofencing is a technology where you can set known good IP addresses, or do the inverse and say, hey, we don't do business in China, we don't do business in Uzbekistan or somewhere else in Eastern Europe. So we're going to block all traffic from non-North American or non-US IP addresses, so that at least your attack surface for these different services that you're exposing to the internet is smaller. But those are things that folks can do that aren't additional expense, right? That's not an additional investment, but it's a good way to move the needle for a low capital expenditure.
So, oh, great. That's great advice, JT. Appreciate you taking some time today to answer a few questions. Just a reminder to everybody to take a look at the IOC tracker. It's linked in the description here with the video. Feel free to reach out to us anytime with cybersecurity questions, challenges, anything that we can do to help keep your organizations safe, operating efficiently during this challenging time. And we wish you all the best. And thank you for joining us.